Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. The RCMP has now been found to have been doing some pretty egregious and terrible things. The RCMP destroyed police records from the night Colten Boushie died. Now I know a lot of my viewers are American, so very quickly, Colten Boushie was an indigenous Cree man who, along with I think 3 or 4 other Canadians, went onto the farm of a Mr. Gerald Stanley in Saskatchewan, like rural Saskatchewan. I think it was in Big R, Saskatchewan. Now, obviously the testimonies differ a bit, but basically they entered the property. Mr. Stanley thought he had to defend his property, and so he shot at Colten Boushie and ultimately killed him. There's some other messed up stuff. It's a whole thing. I would also like to remind people that actually our firearm laws in Canada are supposed to, at least, be pretty egregious in terms of, no, you're not even allowed to defend yourself with a firearm in self-defense, because that's seen as an unnecessary escalation of potential violence and confrontation. That's how it is on paper, but as we've seen with this case, not so much. Now, what also came out is that aside from destroying these records from the night Colten Boushie died, the RCMP have also been found, and it's been raising some concern that they had also tried to intimidate, for lack of a better term, the survivors and anyone else who dared to question them and their authority. Another point of contention, according to the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission, was that the RCMP also destroyed not only recordings and transcripts of radio traffic between officers who responded to the shooting, but they also weren't told about a separate simultaneous RCMP internal investigation into the handling of this case. Which again, I remind you, stoked a lot of tensions in both the prairies and just Canada in general about what happened and, you know, the plight of Native people in Canada. Additionally, while we're on the subject of the RCMP and how frankly terrible they are in a great many circumstances, it was also the RCMP who sat idly by and did nothing while angry, vengeful lobster fishermen in Nova Scotia attacked, harassed, burned down, and destroyed the lobster catch of the Mi'kmaq people who were simply enforcing their treaty rights. Not even enforcing their treaty rights, just participating in what we said they were allowed to do. They weren't protesting things. It wasn't, a protest lobster catch. They are allowed to catch that lobster. And the RCMP out in Nova Scotia, who are supposed to serve and protect the people, very literally stood by and did nothing. So I'm hoping and praying that if you're hearing about this for the first time and you thought RCMP were a bunch of goody two-shoes silly cops and red surges, that's not the case. The RCMP is absolutely a imperialist arm of the settler colonial state that is Canada. And the RCMP, as far as a police force, are supposed to go, because in many cases they serve as the provincial police in a great many provinces and territories. They themselves, in that capacity, are still subject to numerous complaints against their conduct, against not only their fellow officers, especially female officers, but how they treat Indigenous people and poor people. This also has a lot to say about, again, they're not doing anything. So why are we funding these guys again? It is so ridiculous. And unfortunately, it's not surprising, right? Most of us kind of knew, oh yeah, cops are corrupt, right? So of course it's probably going to apply to the RCMP. And now we have the proverbial smoking gun. So I wonder how many people are going to start to seriously consider, hashtag abolish the RCMP. Because quite frankly, with how they have acted and how they continue to conduct themselves today, removing natives from protest camps like the Unistoten camp in the mountains of BC, which is basically our version of Standing Rock, how they are still very abusive towards Indigenous people and minorities, how they stood by and did nothing while the Mi'kmaq simply wanted to exercise their treaty rights, how they've buried information and not done their due diligence and informed various commissions and public commissions about what they've done, what they've destroyed, starting a secondary investigation. The laundry list of terrible things that the RCMP has done and continues to do is massive. And yet, here we are, still faced once again with an egregious abuse of power and corruption on the part of the RCMP. And while we have this proof and this mountain of evidence and all these other problems that everyone knows about, nothing is probably going to be done. Because, oh, it's a national institution and our history and our heritage, and it's ridiculous, and the RCMP needs to be either abolished or rebuilt from the bottom up. That is what needs to happen. But unfortunately, knowing the parties and the people in power, that's not going to happen. And that's what's bothering me today.